it is unprecedented what's happening at the moment. And I know that we use that word unprecedented so often to describe what's going on. But it's actually quite interesting because the philosophy of phytobiophysics is a philosophy that's been built over many, many years, together with all of you as part of the research, part of the knowledge and the wisdom. And of course, I want to say that, you know, with all that's going on at the moment, one of the most important things that we all have to hold on to and look at is the sort of the beginning, going back to the beginning of the values of what really life is all about. Throughout the centuries, there have always been divergences of opinion with regard to health. And it's quite interesting that the basic concept of phytobiophysics, which is the use of the extraordinary scientific principles of life through plants, through energy, through the exquisite wisdom of history, nature, who we are, what we are doing with our lives, and how we are brought to this moment in time. And what is so extraordinary is that humanity hasn't changed for millions of years. Our genome, our human bodies, our cell structures have remained constant and absolutely extraordinary. What changes is belief systems, principles, ideology, ideas, and who is important at the moment is, unfortunately, our lives have been taken over by the pharmaceutical industry. And I think that this is incredibly sad. I've gone back to the beginning, and funnily enough, I've suddenly started to think, look, I want to go back to basic principles. And so I went back to my original textbook, the book that I wrote in 1989, when I was doing some extraordinary work with the Open International University, meeting with scientists and specialists, practitioners, and people who were incredibly knowledgeable, going right back into the whole level of science, which was not just pharmaceutical chemistry, but scientists, leading scientists like Professor Fritz Albert Popp, extraordinary scientists who'd studied under Dr. Voll, incredible scientists from Korea, from China, from Macau, from Malaysia, from Hong Kong, looking at ancient principles of Chinese medicine, looking at the concepts of natural medicine alongside these scientists who were specializing in very specific fields. And the glorious thing about our philosophy, phytobiophysics, is this concept of bringing together knowledge and wisdom from all over the world and forming bridges, forming a knowledgeable bridge so that the language that we speak is one that we all understand, that the whole of humanity can come to terms with. Intriguingly enough, ancient Chinese medicine is probably Indian, Sanskrit, and Chinese medicine is by far the most ancient form of healing wisdom that has survived on this planet for hundreds and thousands of years. And we dismiss it at our peril, because the concept of electrical energy and field forces and the circuitry of the human body is absolutely fascinating. Now, intriguingly enough, we circulated a photograph, and very recently, which you've all seen, which is absolutely astonishing, because it proves every aspect of phytobiophysics that we've talked about all the time, and that is that we use the exquisite light energy of plants. We capture the light energy of plants by the traditional method of the traditional sun method, by placing a flower in water in the sunlight to capture that exquisite power, that biophoton resonance. And we use that biophoton resonance to rebalance and tune the cell structures in the human system. And I think that photograph, which I think you've all seen, just proves everything that we're talking about. But the one thing that's really astonishing about it, and I really, really want you to understand how it moves me beyond anything you could possibly imagine, is that when I wrote the book about the concept of cells vibrating on light frequency, what we were talking about is the energetic field force of cells, which we refer to as antonites. Now, in Professor Fritz Albert Popp refers to these vibrational energy of the cell as the biophoton resonance. So it doesn't matter what the terminology was those days. Of course, I understand that what he was talking about is exactly what I was talking about. And if you look at that photograph very carefully, you will see that the colors match exactly the vibrations of the rainbow. And if you look at the mitochondria of the cell and the actual mitochondria of the nuclei of the cell, you'll see that it's absolutely pink. It's ultraviolet. And then around it is violet. I mean, it's unbelievable. And each of those little organelles within the cell are vibrating on different color frequencies. Now, in modern society, when we do damage to the cell structures of the human body, the biophoton resonance starts to break down. You've got to remember that our wisdom about what's going on in the cell is only as good, if you like, the proof of our wisdom is only as good as the equipment available. When I was doing this research, we didn't have that photography. We didn't have that equipment. What we had was the wisdom of acupuncture and the Fritz Albert Popp's knowledge and Dr. Voll's knowledge about the way acupuncture points in the human body resonate on very specific. That is what I find absolutely mind-boggling. It's mind-blowing because it shows that our basic principles from which we work are absolutely sound. And this is very, very important. And it's particularly important because of that original research into the way the pineal gland accepts light energy, transmits it via the body through the cell structures, and particularly the mitochondria of every cell that actually is capable of creating new life. Funnily enough, yesterday in the magazine, the Daily Mail, there was an article about how they've discovered that they can clone ovum and sperm from other cells in the human body. And that, my darlings, makes me feel very, very sick. But it also proves what we're talking about is that every cell in the human body is literally a hologram of the whole. Every cell in the human body has a brain, and every cell in the human body has a pineal. And this is why the vaccine, particularly the Pfizer vaccine, is so incredibly dangerous. The Pfizer vaccine has been created to introduce a protein spike that interferes with the pineal relay enzyme, which is the pineal relay enzyme for the brain factor, pineal relay enzyme for the liver factor, and fundamentally pineal melatonin enzyme factor for the thymus, for the production of thymopoietin, the T8 suppressor cells. Now, when you start to interfere with the genome by genetically modifying and introducing genetically modifying situations, what we see in our philosophy is that the actual damage is alarming because it sheds and spreads right the way through the philosophy. This is violet energy. So when you go back to look at that photograph, you'll see where the violet energy is. It's bang smack in the middle of the brain of the cell, the mitochondria of the cell, the nuclei of the cell. So if you damage on a particular level, we can relate that damage to a color and make it very simple. The damage of the Pfizer vaccine is ultraviolet and to a certain extent violet. So let's go back to basic principles of color. let's look at violet and what violet energy is related to in our souls, in our hearts, and in our bodies. We know that violet is a spiritual energy. We know that ultraviolet is an extremely spiritual energy. So just take it back a little bit further into our formulas, our home formulas, HF. We have two violet formulas. We have the ultraviolet formula, which is flower formula HF3, spiritual calm. And this exquisite little formula is for the support of the 7-year cycles of life. It's for the support of the whole maturity of the human body, the 7-year cycles, the child becoming 7, puberty starting at 7 years old, 14, 21, maturity, hormones. We're talking about all the hormones that generate. So we know from that exquisite flower essence, that home formula, that actually if you damage the human cell on the violet level, you are going to create a cascade of damage throughout the soul, throughout the spiritual levels of the body on very, very dire levels. Look at flower formula 4, for example. HF4 is thistle, and that is for the support of the blood platelets. It's the relationships that we have with our fathers. The vibration is 423 nanometers, 360 nanometers. So when you interfere with the genome of the human body on that level, the cascade is dynamically terrifying. And this is one of the reasons why we are using all our ultraviolet formulas to support the damage of the Pfizer vaccine. Unfortunately, America, United Kingdom, and Israel are the 3 countries, and Jersey, that have gone absolutely crazy about vaccinating the world. And we've now vaccinated something like 23 million people in the United Kingdom and a large proportion of people in Jersey with the Pfizer vaccine. And the damage is almost irreversible. And it's very, very disturbing if you honestly want to basically go back to basic principles of understanding the damage. Then all you have to do is look at your formulas, study your formulas that are ultraviolet and violet. These are the formulas that give you understanding about the complex relationships of these, of the damage of that particular vaccine. Now, we also have the Moderna vaccine, which is also very, very similar to the Pfizer vaccine and is doing the same level of damage. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to investigate the other vaccines. I think you've got quite a few variations in Malaysia. We've only got those 2 in United Kingdom at the moment, the Pfizer and the AstraZeneca. So the complications with this vaccine are very, very worrying. What I'm seeing is disturbing, because I'm seeing my friends who are having this vaccine not necessarily caring for themselves because they just want to travel, and they're being told if you don't have the vaccine you can't travel. And that's the great sort of blackmail at the moment, is that you can't go anywhere if you haven't had the vaccine. And again, you know, this is worrying, because a lot of people just go along and have medical procedures without any real sort of understanding of what they're doing. They're not even reading the patient pamphlet. And the concept is that, oh, well, I've had my vaccine, now I can travel, everything is fine. And so that isn't actually quite, aha, there we have it. Thank you, Moon. Absolutely beautiful. Okay, look at the cell structure of the nuclei and look at how exquisite it is, because the center of it is ultraviolet and the surrounding cellules are violet. And then we go out to the breathing, the little green ones, which are the respiration, and you can see that they are actually the respirators of the cell. It's quite extraordinary. And then you can see the little cell structure right in the middle, and you can actually see that it's ultraviolet red. The little liver you see that exquisite structure of the little circular structure is yellow, and that's the liver of the cell. So what is extraordinary there is the absolute proof that cellules vibrate on frequencies of color. And that is extremely fascinating about this concept of using our formulas to rebalance the resonance of these cell structures. And of course, when we take a flower formula, the resonance goes on and on and on into the center of the cell. If we take a flower formula, they're not that strong, and they take a long time to reach that cellular structure that you're seeing there. If, for example, you are using the heart power formula, which is heart power 2, which is spiritual calm, then it's much, much more powerful, and it can reach that cell brain, if you like, of the cell far quicker than a flower formula, much more powerful. But when we look at what the damage of the Pfizer is doing on this level, then it's frightening. It's very frightening. We have the wherewithal to bring about an incredible level of security, though, and that's good news. We have the ability to help patients who've had the Pfizer vaccine, and I've got very many who I'm treating. And it's very sad for me because I'm witnessing an extremely sad phenomena with some of my patients. Some of them I've looked after for a long time. Unfortunately, they rush to have the vaccine for whatever reasons, and yet I'm caring for them. The program that I'm having to use in order to combat the damage of the Pfizer vaccine is our heart power formula, Spiritual Calm, which is our ultraviolet formula. Remember that this formula is all to do with the coping with spiritual issues in our lives, coping with our relationships with our fathers, ourselves as men, our relationships with our husbands, our partnerships, our children, our male children, a very, very deep, powerful, powerful energy vibrating on a very high frequency. So Heart Power 2, Spiritual Calm, is our very, very, very important heart power formula. And so if, for example, Pfizer is damaging the human genome on such a level, then you can see also that there are going to be repercussions spiritually with people who've had Pfizer vaccine, which I'm seeing already. We can actually see that people's marriages are packing up. And frankly speaking, I've seen with my friends who are my age, so, you know, in their mid-70s, they're slowly going mad. And I've seen this with several friends, and it's breaking my heart because I can't help them. They don't want my help. They're medical, you know, they're going to their doctors. And what are they being told? Oh, if you have a reaction to the Pfizer vaccine, take paracetamol. All right, paracetamol is an aggressive toxic substance, and it also damages on ultraviolet. So we use paracetamol antidote. We would use Superfit 2 Calm, our ultraviolet Superfit, to negate the effects of chemical toxicity of aspartame, paracetamol, and various other things. So you can actually see quite interestingly that if you understand the basic principles of what we need to support these vaccines, then you can start to see very clearly how dangerous that Pfizer vaccine is. So the level of support is Heart Power 2, father relationships. But remember also that this is the left brain, which is dealing with financial matters. Now we have another factor coming into play because a lot of people have lost their jobs. An enormous number of people are terrified of not being able to support their families, not being able to fulfill their role, not being able to feed their families, not being able to pay their rent, losing their jobs and not being able to live in accordance with, you know, their normal success story. So what is happening here is that we're seeing suicide, because people, when they cannot survive financially, their only way out, the tricuspid way out, is to become suicidal. And that we're seeing high levels of suicide amongst the high part of, people who are not able to make money, not being able to survive. So that's another issue. But then we're also seeing the arrogance of the tricuspid constitution. Remember, the tricuspid constitution is the noble father, the provider, the incredible, exquisite power of the tricuspid constitution is the preparing, looking after people, coping with strategy, problem solving, and people are losing that. So they become the opposite. They lose their stability, they become angry, aggressive, rude. I've seen and witnessed people becoming, they get Tourette's. People are shouting, losing their temper, swearing, being aggressive. I was told by somebody the other day that they were walking their dog in the park, and another dog ran up and started barking at them, and they said, "Oh, could you please look after your dog?" And the dog handler started shouting at them and being very abusive and using the most disgusting language. So that was very disturbing, that people who are having this vaccine are becoming angry. And again, we're seeing this in society where people are being rude and aggressive. And have you had your vaccine? Oh, well, you're not coming to my house if you haven't had your vaccine. Oh, you won't be invited to my dinner party if you haven't had your vaccine. Or you won't be allowed to work for this company if you haven't had your vaccine. So there is a loss of spiritual stability in people's minds and brains. There is one other aspect that needs to be taken into consideration here. When we look at the pathways of the sensory organs, we know that actually the vibration of ultraviolet is the optic nerve, the second cranial nerve. So those of you who practice podoricinian, we're having to work very hard on the second cranial nerve, the podoricidian cranial nerve. But also we know that heart power 2 supports sight. Now, if you look at people who've had the Pfizer vaccine, it's quite alarming. The first thing that happens is that their faces go bright scarlet and they look as if they're drunk. They start to look as if they've had too much alcohol. Their faces become florid and bright scarlet and very puffy and swollen. And there are two reasons for this. Remember that the optic nerve is the kidney meridian. So we're looking at concepts of vasopressin and oxytocin becoming very disturbed. And the initial reaction of the Pfizer vaccine is the kidney meridian is upset. People get angry and the eyesight is becoming disturbed. And again, what happens shortly after that vaccine is that the face collapses. The eyes have gone dark, very, very dark, so that the band across the eyes is very alarming. Black shadows under the eyes, huge black shadows, and then the face collapses. So it becomes, gaunt, and people look absolutely terrible, old, aged. And this is very concerning. That's only the first vaccine. The second vaccine is alarming. I'm now beginning, because they're doing the second vaccine now, I'm now seeing that people are literally going like this and dropping off the cliff. A lot of people are dying. Mortality rate has gone up. But one of the most worrying aspects here is that people are not dying of COVID. No, they're dying of their own health problems, because this Pfizer vaccine is damaging the autoimmune system and the ability of the pineal melatonin, thymus factor, thymopoietin. Then we have another issue here, because what is actually happening is their autoimmune system is packing up because their brain cannot produce this hormone to deal with their own health problems. So they're dying of cancer, they're dying of autoimmune situations. Their arthritis is much worse. they're getting pins and needles and numbness in their legs. Multiple sclerosis is on the increase. All people's own health problems are increasingly more severe, and it's happening very, very fast. But before, when we didn't have the vaccine, they were pushing for the vaccine. So the death certificates were, doctors were obliged to put on the death certificate COVID, regardless of what their death was all about. Now, when doctors are dealing with the death of patients who've had the COVID vaccine, and they don't call it the COVID vaccines, they call it the COVID vaccine. In other words, they've all lumped together in the same. They're not the same. They're very different. I'll talk to you about AstraZeneca in a minute. The truth is that now they're not allowed to put COVID death on the death certificate if they've had COVID vaccine. So what's happening is that the level of COVID deaths has dropped dramatically, and now they're claiming that the vaccine is a huge success. Far from it. It is not a huge success. It is a very, very frightening situation.